Okay, so we are blending and making adjustments. We've made color adjustments. And you can always go back to those. I see the dark of the eye here. And I'm going to cut out the exterior of these porcupine quills so I can see how it overlaps with the feathers. And I chose pretty difficult exterior textures just to show you how to navigate such things in selections. The first thing I'm going to do is actually go back to levels, and I'm just going to deepen the shadows a little bit in it, just so that those darks kind of match the dark of the eye. It's very subtle, but it makes a difference from there to there. All right, now what I need to do is pick which of these quills will be at the edge. And to do that, I'm going to use feather on the lasso of 1 pixel. So a very small feather, but I don't want it to be cutting right at the pixel level. And I'm just going to arbitrarily choose which of these spikes get cut out. Now notice in this photo reference, some of the spikes lose focus pretty darn quickly. Or quills. So I'm trying to go around the ones that are fairly sharp. And I'm not getting them perfect, and that's okay. One sign of very amateurish creature design is that everything is incredibly polished, and then it doesn't blend in with any natural, believable environment. Okay, so I'm going to find that edge. I'm going to take a big chunk. Whoops. And I just let go a little too soon, so I lost this edge. So I'm going to hold down Shift to, or actually Option to subtract away, because I don't want to cut off the top of that one. Okay, now hit Delete. And because it's feathering, remember what that does? It gives me a slight softened edge. So I can hit Delete multiple times, and it will trim it down for me in a pretty clean way. See that? And yes, some of the edges aren't perfect, but I found my my border. I'm going to continue that on back. And I'm using the lasso. And because they're organic textures, I get to decide where the edge is and where the edge isn't. We actually have a broken quill right here, so that's kind of cool. And there's a reason that character designers go to, and animators go to the zoo a lot. Always looking for inspiration from the natural world. But this is true in marketing as well. If you're looking for the next mascot for an insurance company, trying to understand what their visual appeal is, whether it's an emu, whether it's a gecko. A lot of that inspiration comes from the natural world. Okay. Then delete with that 1 pixel feather. And then just, I'm going to keep going around. And I really get to invent this edge. Even when I don't have the whole quill, I get to decide where to arbitrarily kind of cut it off. Whoops. And you can always add to it later. I made a little mistake there. So I'll fix that. Now, do you need to know how to draw well to make good selections? Well, it's all the same skill. The more experience you have drawing, the more practice you've gotten making good selections. It's something everyone can learn just with patience, kind of controlling their eye, small motor functions. So what I want to do is subtract away holding down the Option key, these sections where I messed up a little bit and made it too thin. And at the same time, I can hold down Shift and add in parts of the selection for parts I want to make sure get cut away. A little bit of that black on that quill. So remember, you can modify your selections with Option and Shift. Okay, now delete, 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 delete with that 1 pixel feather. And you can see I now have this top edge cut out of my quills. And we're going to move it on down. Still using the lasso, still using the 1 pixel feather. I'm going to trim this one a little bit. Tighten it up, bring this around, actually make this maybe all one quill even though it's too overlapped and kind of blurry. I can cut all those down into one. Okay, now I can see clearly enough the overlap with these feathers, which I marked red to go back to, and now I can play with their adjustments. First, levels. Play with the midtones. Do I want them brighter? Do I want them darker? I think I actually want them brighter. I wouldn't have thought so. I'm going to limit the shadows a little bit. Limit the highlights a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Now color is going to be interesting here because they're black feathers. So color balance, even though they're black feathers, you can get color temperature from them because that's the lighting on the black. So I'm going to push them a little bit towards the blue and the magenta in the midtones and the red. I'm going to warm them up in the highlights. Some ways. And then in the shadows, let's see if I can cool them down without it going to black. Okay, so you can see the difference. Levels, color balance. Don't worry about what's around it because it's going to get cut out. Now I go to hue saturation. And this is where I can actually try to bring out any intensity it might have. And I got on the wrong layer somehow, so cancel. Get on the right layer, which are these feathers. Then image hue saturation. Can only affect the layer that you're on. Push the hue around. I think there's good. Then do I want it more saturated, right? Or less saturated? And I want it just a little bit more. Okay, good. And that'll work. Okay, now, how can I select around these feathers? Well, unlike my porcupine reference, which I had to cut out with the lasso because there was just a ton of information, this is a great candidate for using your magic wand. So I'm going to do a tolerance of 32, the default, contiguous, and I'm going to click on the negative space here around it, hold down Shift, try to get all of it. And then, before I hit delete, because if I hit delete now, it'll be really sharp. Which actually isn't terrible. But what I can do is I can say select and mask. Even after I hit delete, as long as the selection's still active, I can feather that selection by 1 pixel, grow the edge a little bit, and then that, when I hit delete, will soften it. Just a little bit, bite away from it. That helps get rid of some of that masking. Now I'm going to try the magic wand with contiguous turned off to get all these little gaps. Right? And then, again, go to Select and Mask to feather it. It remembers my settings because I said please remember. And then delete. And you see how it softens all of that. And I'm almost done. The gray really makes it easy to see where this debris is. And I'm going to select it again, select and mask. And with these organic textures, it's okay to really trim them down. There we go. All right. So now I've got some feathers. I've got some that are just free floating. And for those, I'm going to actually lasso those and just bring them down into the composition where they make more sense, like right there. So this is internal compositing, moving things from assets you've already used. You can even Command T and free transform them. And these are not on new layers. These are in the same layers. And then kind of move them in. All right. So I've got those feathers now. So now I've done all the color correcting of the head. Now I can start working on the outside edges of the head. So I go back to the top and I see, does this layer have any outside edges? No, that's the eye. Does this one? No, that's around the eye. Does this one? Well, I trimmed those outside edges. Does this one? Yes, this one has a lot. So now I go to this side, and instead of trying to isolate that layer and trim all the outside edges, I only trim it where it overlaps with what I'm making. So for instance, I know that this is showing. And I can do it in chunks, and I have a 1 pixel feather, and I trim it. Command plus to zoom in. Never zoom in more than 200%. You're getting way too picky. This is at 100%, so I'm actually seeing the pixels at their real size once it prints. Now I could try the magic wand for this, but because this has so much variation, it's going to be cleaner for me to just use the lasso and the feather. And because it's organic, it's okay for me to cut into it a little bit and make it up. Yes, so because I have a 1 pixel feather set for my lasso, when I actually delete, instead of cutting right in between these pixels, which will look like very stair-steppy, it will feather it by 1 pixel each time. So the feather actually softens the edge. And that just makes it a lot more photographic. You know how that is just slightly soft. Just like the photographs are slightly soft. So let me show you a chunk. I'll do this one, and then I'll show you a chunk without the feathering. So this is kind of refined cutting, right? So if I turn the feather to 0 and then do an edge, no matter how many times I hit delete, it's just always going to cut right in between those pixels. So I'm zoomed in 600% here, but I delete again, I delete again, I delete again. It doesn't do anything because it's only ever going to be like that. But I want it to look more like this, thus the 1 pixel feather. So for creature design, I would always do a 1 pixel feather. Where do you want a bigger feather? Well, what if you're doing fur, right? You're doing something that's a really soft texture. You can try 2 or even 3, but remember, what's great about the feathering is you can vary it just by how many times you hit delete. So you have more control if it's a lesser amount. Like I missed a little bit on the edge there, so I can just go back in and then feather it. That's why the gray is a really nice background for this, because the white can